Welcome to the Software Lifecycle Stories podcast. We bring you stories of what worked and sometimes what did not in the course of discovering, designing, developing, delivering, and using software-based solutions, as shared by practitioners who went through these situations. Welcome to this episode of the Software Lifecycle Stories. I am Sivaguru. Today, I am in conversation with Vandana Abraham, Head of Design at Atlassian, India. In this conversation, she shares her perspectives on the difference between design and art, aptitudes to be a designer, building experiences for a global audience, and some ideas that were far ahead of their time. Designing for the future, and design as a career for women. Listen on. Hi, Vandana. Welcome to the show. UX has been, one of my favorite topics also, in terms of the software life cycle. It is not only about the creation, but it's also about the consumption. The moment you talk about consumption coming after creation, I think we have it wrong. So looking at what needs to be consumed and then how one can do that. So I'm really thrilled to have this conversation because I don't know what you're going to talk about. So it'll be good if you introduce yourself first, and then let's see from the top of your mind, whatever you have, we'll see how the conversation flows.
Great. Glad that, I'm really glad to be here and get a chance to speak to a wider audience on the passion that's been driving me for a while. I currently head design, software user experience design at Atlassian, and I've had about 18 years of experience in the software space in designing experiences in software. And prior to that, I did design hardware or physical fabric for users for about 5 years. So it's been a long time spent building consumable things for people, virtual and physical. The point that you just made, which was creating something and then getting it consumed, designers rarely think of it that way. Mm-hmm. We worry about all the things that are not being done right and then figure out ways of how to set that right or put it in front of people. So it's if you took the analogy of cooking and food, we don't start by saying, let me cook something and find someone to eat it. You actually start the other way. What do people like to eat? What are the things that people don't like to eat in a restaurant? What are the things that bother them when they're eating? And we try and make sure that gets addressed in providing them a great experience in eating and consuming the food. So.
Okay, good. So this actually, this a point of view. Whenever someone is very creative, in history we notice that there is a certain amount of I can't find anything other than ego. Probably. I mean, they have their own styles. Either they have a following, or they say this is what I have to offer. Including some restaurants where some chefs say that this is my signature dish, and I do this. Or everybody loves to quote Steve Jobs for design, and he says, I know what they need. Right? So what is your take on that?
So fundamentally, I believe the object of design is to try and solve for someone else's problem and not necessarily yours. Partly what we call self-expression in art has its place because that's where you express your own creativity, and if you are very skilled in a particular kind of task, that creativity and self-expression and that becomes art that many people would love and appreciate. So whether it's styling a vehicle, right, in the form, or it's in the kind of garments and clothing that you would make, which that combination of what purpose you try to do, which is the clothes, and then your skill and self-expression as art, which gives it style, and then people develop love or attraction for that. So I think it has a very strong place in design. But it's not necessarily something that every designer is able to do to that degree. And similarly, when you do it more for your own expression rather than for the purpose of some other for someone else to consume, then it becomes more of art. In which case, whether someone actually uses it or not, you have satisfied your purpose.
Yeah.
And got it out there.
Uh-huh.
And I think in highly creative people, both types of motivations exist. One is I want to express myself, and I want to express it like Dali. I want to express it in a way that nobody today has seen, because I might believe that there is a place for this to exist, but nobody in my lifetime appreciated it, and they'll appreciate it many years later. Architects struggle with that so much of the time.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that it isn't great design. It was meant for a time or a period where the rest of the environment was not yet ready to see that. Maybe it will never be ready.
So, what are the aptitudes that one needs to be a designer?
You really need to listen and see and observe. Especially in design, to the part where your motivation is to try and make things better for someone else. And of course, it's not free and it's not a social work you're doing. You actually do it to derive business value. You
Right.
want to do it because you will get paid for it. It is. It's not a non-profit initiative.
Right.
So for that to happen, you need to be able to understand where problems lie. Which you can't do if you go in and say, here's how I'm going to solve your problem. You need to first have a very strong sense and ability to empathize with others, to see where their problems lie. And then you need to have a fairly good understanding of a business system and an ecosystem to see whether there is value in solving that problem and how that value could arrive. And you need skill or a craft and expertise in the material that you're going to use to create that solution. So I think it's the combination of all those three that you're constantly working on.
Yeah, no, this is very nicely put. See, we talk about software as a knowledge era problem, where the material that you work on or the material that works on ideas and all that is essentially people and their minds. And interesting that you mentioned empathy, right? Many times, some of the questions that we get from the teams that we coach, whether it is the designers or the developers, is that they see that they are at two different extremes, where probably the engineers want everything specified, everything falling in probably patterns that they already know, and maybe a little uncomfortable to experiment with something different or look at things differently. So what have been some of the stories of how you've been able to establish that empathy for both the users and also the people who are going to be creating these solutions?
Okay, that I was wondering where the question was going. Okay, so it's interesting that you would say that engineers sit at one end and designers sit at one end. I've actually found that to be a little different in that every individual, regardless of where their skill lies, whether it's in solving a problem with code or whether it's in solving a problem with users, everybody has that skill part. They don't necessarily have had experience in figuring out how to focus it to understand the business and the user need. So I'll say that even for designers, I've had designers come and tell me, why do we have customers? Why do we have users? Let's not have that. I'm great at doing this kind of work, and so I'll get paid for it. And I've heard engineers or developers speak about, we should actually go and build this new technology because why are we struggling with trying to incrementally change something? Let's just start anew and build it anew. But there are business reasons and the impact that it would have on the user. So in all cases, why are you doing what you do is what we start with. Framing the problem. And that's why one of the things that I do here is I run a workshop on problem framing, which helps everybody involved in the problem solving business understand what the problem is and be able to see it from the perspective of the customer first. Then you're able to better assess and evaluate what do you use to do that. Some people do it inherently because they've had the experience and expertise, and it
Yeah.
seems like magic. It seems like they're completely enlightened people. But that's because it comes from a place of having done this for so long. How do you help people just starting out in their career to start seeing through these lens? And there are techniques. Problem framing workshop is actually a great way to do that. That's what I found.
Okay. So, are these aptitudes to be a designer trainable, or does it come
that's
naturally?
nice.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because when I also look at having designers come and join me or work with me, I look for traits which are inherent in people, which you can't build. Curiosity. If you're not inherently curious, or it's kind of been baked out of you, because all kids are curious, okay? At the age of 2 or 3, they're putting everything in their mouth, they're figuring out everywhere to climb in and out of it. But at some point, that seems to be taken away from you, and it takes a very long time to build that back. So when you find people who are inherently curious, who are not afraid to ask why and question the status quo, I found that that's a really good trait to look for and to build on. Being social, or at least being comfortable with people, is also one thing that is definitely needed. Otherwise, it's very difficult to open up and empathize with your user or your customer if you find it difficult to be vulnerable yourself. So those are some that you look for, those not necessarily skills, but more of traits of people, and those become easier to then help them learn the skills of or the techniques and the methods. The other one, which is rare, which you look for, is just raw talent in how you see certain things, and that's like a skill, like juggling. You can teach juggling to a certain degree. After which, people can juggle 4 things, 5 things, but are they going to continue to keep exerting the muscle to juggle 25 things and flaming swords? So for a designer, you have to be driven to want to keep using those tools of the trade. So if you have that inherent motivation, then yes, you're trainable. But a lot of times people would take it to one level and say, after this point, it doesn't drive me. It's not something that is my passion. So passion is the third.
Okay. Juggling. This is something that I've been asking pretty much all the women guests that we've had. Also, this being March, and we've been featuring women around the Women's Day and all that. Either by nature or by compulsion, women seem to be master jugglers. At work and outside work as well. Now, the other aspect is some of the traits that you mentioned earlier in terms of not being flustered when things are probably not there, or trying to understand what you're cooking for, who you're cooking for, and things like that. This may be a controversial question, but then, do women make better designers?
It's actually interesting that you'd ask that, because some of the times during our hiring process, we get asked, are you biased towards women? Are you ending up hiring more women? Are you more sympathetic towards them? Do male candidates not get a look in because of that? I have to say that, at least from my lens, that in a professional environment, and I think in most cases, after a point, you look beyond the gender to the core of the person, how they behave, what their traits and everything are. This may come down to the point of whether we say fundamentally women have a different set of traits than men. I really don't believe that so much. I believe that we may have had, men and women may have had differences in their physical structure, which is why women are able to bend sideways, possibly, and men could carry a lot more weights than they could. Today's work environment doesn't require that degree of physical challenge. So then it comes down to your environment and what you've been taught to believe and what you've been kind of programmed to think. So if I was hiring in Helsinki or Sweden, I don't think I would expect any difference there, because that country has literally changed the entire dynamic between thinking of genders as a differentiator role, and it took them 20 years to do that. So I actually don't look at that aspect at all of whether men or women are better designers or not, or better jugglers or not. And I think especially having had global teams in the last 8 years, I've seen that more and more, that there actually is no difference. There is really no difference.
Reassuring to hear.
Yeah, there is absolutely no difference.
Okay.
So,
Okay. So, you spoke about a country as an example. So this is something that I've always been, confused about, or maybe intrigued about. Even simple things like probably painting a footpath, or even laying a footpath, or something like that. The attention to finish, or probably saying that, oh, maybe it's a little crooked, it's okay.
It's my bugbear.
Okay.
You got it, huh?
Yeah. So, what do you think about that? How is there a societal transformation in that, or?
This is something, especially when I look at designers from different regions. It's not the gender difference. It's actually your cultural difference of what your environment told you is okay and what it will not forgive. So, in an environment where your footpaths are laid by machines, everything's at right angles to each other, there, if you see a deviation, if you don't make it exactly right angled, if your consistent width of, say, piping along a footpath is not exactly the same amount, that's going to stand out like a sore thumb. Which is why the eye and attention of detail of every person there, not just designers, anyone who lives there, they can catch the deviation from the norm very quickly. In a country where we do everything manually, which means the second time that I make a petal on a flower, it's going to look different than the first time I made it. The embroidery is never going to be continuous. It has its own variations, but it means that any variation cannot be detected. Which means if I choose to make the first square in a footpath one size and the next one a slightly different size, I'm not even going to see that difference because my environment doesn't actually throw it up as a variation. It's just the norm.
Okay.
So a lot of the time, we struggle, say, in kind of things that we do in India, we struggle in being able to do things that are pixel perfect perfection, which would be, just very natural in Japan. And people in countries like maybe Germany would struggle with expressing the range of colors and variety of forms that we can generate, almost with your eyes closed and your left hand tied behind your back, the way we'd be able to take it out. So I think the ability to leverage that variation, it's not that one's right and one's wrong, for that purpose, which is the right one to do. Now, this is the place where these start becoming difficult is when you talk about city planning, when you talk about art traffic, when you talk about systems that you build. Systems were built in Ashoka's time, right? He had the vision to do roadways everywhere across the world. I think it just needs vision and pushing through something. That is a piece that we could probably support better, I think.
So, as a person who's looking at design globally in a product that has been very successful and growing virally and all that, what are some of the challenges that you face in having a global team, building a global product, but still you need to have maybe some kind of consistent or predictable or expected kind of experience for the users?
So definitely one of the things that happens there is building a design system. And the design system that you build for consistency and standardization can be owned by only one team and gets adopted everywhere. So it's the equivalent of every other large-scale manufacturing system. The variations come from how does that product become relevant to teams who are culturally so different here, versus teams who are culturally very different in China versus a team working together in, say, the US. And that's where the product has to have flavors, more flexibility, and that's why you do customization, you allow for a base platform and then extend that. So when we look at what we're doing here in India right now, and what we've done in also my previous companies, it's always been the core platform has to have one vision, one team who's consistently working on it, whichever part of the world they're in. And the objective for that team, the purpose of that team is actually to make things standardized. It's not so much to make it delightful and that every time someone experiences something, the system, it puts you into raptures. No, it's actually to be completely hidden. Users shouldn't know it exists. It's almost like that's your basic language. Nobody looks at an alphabet anymore. They look at the poetry that's created by it. You're talking about creating that alphabet. That happens once. Different teams will then create different poetry.
So, do you have any, since we call this Software Lifecycle Stories, I always ask for our guests to share something that in hindsight probably is very funny or humorous or obvious, but then which could be a learning for our listeners, saying that there's something that you probably either thought that something was a very cool idea, but then probably it didn't click.
I've got the flip version of that one.
Yeah, or in fact, one of our guests spoke about a product that he had built, and he never foresaw a use case for that. It's just completely when somebody asked him, he said, "Why would you ever want to do that?" He says, "No, this is exactly what I want to do." So,
Yeah, I spoke recently about all the ways in which I completely failed in design because all the things I thought which time proved me so wrong. It's actually practically embarrassing to think about it. But I did find that, for instance, a lot of assumptions that I made based on the information that I had at that time, which seemed very viable, and we went ahead and built products. It took 10 years for that to come to its age because the ecosystem was not in place to see that. Okay. So today, some of the things that we did in 1996, even before 1994, we had. I was working with a startup, and the concept had been to have a handheld device. Which could be used to unlock doors and to make payments, and we had all the scenarios of people being able to do that, and that was even before the mobile phone came to India, and it had been envisioned as one kind of a round device that you could use and do all of these things. There was no Bluetooth or nothing, so it was entirely needed, but impossible to build at that time because it didn't exist. And we didn't take that any further, but 10 years later, when the company reached this particular stage, those things got pulled out again. And we went ahead and built a lot of stuff there in near field, in NFC, and using Bluetooth to make all these changes. So the things you dream about, and I strongly believe science fiction is actually really great for figuring out what the future is, because you dream of a need being fulfilled. It becomes real when the technology is available. But that need existed.
Yeah, I'm reminded of one quote from Douglas Adams, one of my favorite things. He talks about there was a time when civilization thought that digital watches were the ultimate in technology. And he says there was somebody who invented a radio, which you just wave in the general direction of the station and it will play. But then in his typical style he says, but the problem was you had to still sit infuriatingly still to listen to any one station. Because also the limitation probably.
That's actually what happens. So it's interesting, the maturity model of experience design is actually defined by first the invention of a technology and then a use case happening. Jared Spool's actually got a really great model in place for that. And then the amount of time it takes from realizing, say, the technology can do something, and then figuring out what is it that we can use it to do, and then building that experience and making it viable. But then After that, fitting it into an ecosystem that adopts it and makes it spread virally. Because if that doesn't happen, it's going to be limited only to those few people who use it. And that cycle is 20 years.
Oh. So how do you look ahead for 2 generations?
This is always a challenge of looking ahead. So I know other designers in the manufacturing industry space who work with physical product design, and if you're doing industrial manufacturing, you don't have the luxury in software of pulling it back and doing something, right? You are looking at 15 years in the future. This thing that I design now has to be on the road. It has to work for that period of time in a kitchen and last. We don't look that far ahead. We look at building things that people need right now.
Yeah.
We have the ability to make a change to what people feel right now. So there's a lovely illustration that one of the designers had shown in one meeting. He said it's the equivalent of traveling by road. As a designer in software, you can reduce the bumps and make that road smooth because you've filled in all the potholes. Or you can strip. Yeah, the analogy of laying out a road, and when you're traveling on a road, when you've got potholes, you have many ways in which you can address that. One is filling the potholes right now with, a little bit of tar, and you know that in next week it's going to come off and you won't need to do it again. You can relay that road, and you can put white concrete, and you know that it's going to take you 2 months to fix that. You could build a flyover in concrete and make sure that now for years you don't have that problem. We could do any of that in software. We could do them in parallel. And one of the things with user experience designers is that we try and solve for the future, but we also try and make sure you're easing what's happening right now. And that ease of experience means you could either fill it, you could put up a sign which says this road has potholes and here are the potholes. How do you choose to help the user find it easier to navigate what is now? I think that's what we look at. But that didn't answer your question of how do we see the future. So I might digress a little bit and say that there's a technique called future scenarios, and it starts a little bit with need identification. So if you project into the future, and we don't do 10 years, but we could do 3 years and 5 years, and you look at what are the trends that you're seeing in behaviors among users in whichever market that you're interested in. You also look at what is the technology pace and what would that look like 3 years in the future. You look at the environment and what does that look like 3-5 years in the future. What does the sociological elements look like in the future, and the political environment in the future.
Something like the pestle analysis.
And then in that world that is the future, what are people going to feel like and behave like? And that's where you do need identification. Then you look at, now if that's going to be a need, if in the future traffic is just going to be so bad, water is just going to be so bad, people are not going to be living in different kinds of remote spaces, and internet is ubiquitous, connectivity is ubiquitous, then how does our software behave then? What are the needs what is it going to need to be? And it cannot be requiring one person to manage and set up for 1,000 people. Each person has to be independently able to do whatever they need. So it's just identifying that product.
So even though you said that you didn't really see a big difference in terms of gender in the earlier point, there are still a couple of points that keep coming up in conversations with women. One is the need to take career breaks.
Yes, absolutely.
So that is one aspect. The second one is about, of course, balancing the demands at work and home, where at least the expectations of support, both at work and outside work. So
what am I
think I'd love to
Yeah.
get your thoughts, particularly if design as a career makes it easier for women to take breaks or get back in, because in technology, one point that some of them say is that it's changing so fast. If I'm away for 6 months or 1 year, I don't know what these new languages that these people are using or something else.
Okay.
So is there a kind of a re-entry challenge?
That's an interesting point. I haven't thought of it outside of my own domain, the area that I've been in. And I've actually spoken about it saying, so the reason why I shifted careers is actually because I had my son, and it was a difficult pregnancy, so I had to take off from work for quite a few months. But and that break made me rethink about what I could do, and that's when I moved into software. Otherwise, I might still be a textile designer. So I said I had the advantage of being forced to take a break.
Okay.
I don't think a lot of people get that opportunity, so they continue down one path. And it's also largely how you choose to look at it. Is it an opportunity, or do you feel it's a setback that you should now think about, oh, I'm not going to be able to get back into that. What else could you do? So I would say mentally, where are you in looking at opportunities as and when they come and addressing those? The part about and this is not new. I'm very old, so I've been in this business for a long time, and hence it's not that the time that I was a young designer that there was gender equality and everyone believed in it. But I feel that the ability to have open, candid conversations with your managers and with everyone you work with helps a lot in kind of giving you that support for things when you need it. So when you establish, and I find that in teams also, I find really well-functioning teams are ones that communicate well with each other. Then they learn to support each other and build on top of each other. So what kind of teams are you building at home? Have you told your husband, have you told your mother-in-law really how important this job is, and how important it is for you to have a meaningful career, because then you can become independent and do that, because then they'll support you. But if they don't understand that, it's very difficult to have that kind of support come for you if you don't set it up for yourself. So for me, I believe the whole way to bring things forward, and not just for women, for men also, because I think men also feel very pressurized sometimes to say that the expectation is I have to be working all the time, and I can't take a break, and I wanted to look after my kid. So having that conversation, identifying what you want to be able to do together or independently, and building on that, I think is sort of very critical for everyone to have a rich life which you would enjoy. And I think that purpose is actually a nice one. I spend a lot of time, equal amount of time, helping designers understand financial independence. Because if you cannot figure out your finances, how do you think that your business is going to trust you to take financial decisions for them? And then if you're doing that for the business, why are you not doing it at home? Or at least understanding what's happening. In some cases, I've seen either spouse runs the finances, whoever's got a better aptitude for it. But both know what's happening. For me, it's been there I've always looked at it from that perspective.
Okay. How was your shift from textiles to software? Now, other than having to need to switch to software, how do you enjoy being in software?
Oh, that way. I thought you meant that part where entry into that space. Entry into that space was tough, because you've established your chops and your expertise in one field, and then you go into an area where you don't know anything. And what you thought you knew, or you thought you had ego about certain things, you suddenly realize that if you don't understand the material, you are not going to be able to build the right things with it. And understanding that was a pretty rude shock. Having someone tell me also, look, if I had my way, I wouldn't have hired you. You don't know anything about web. Okay, so in that way, it was a very sobering realization. But I think I had great technical people with me who were very patient. And if you keep asking them, they will explain things to you. So
nice.
So that, and what I thought also worked well for me was in textiles, there is a structure. to how you weave. There is you need to understand the math, you need to understand the logic, which made the aspect of software really easier to understand because there are rules to it. There's a way to understand how programming gets done. And once you crack that, it may not be a place I wanted to spend my time, but I got the logic of it, and then you can work with it. So you need to understand that what makes material happen to be able to work with it. And then, of course, when I worked in mobile for 12 years, every day you'd wake up and you didn't know what was going to happen. It was so exciting. But that for me is, I like to learn all the time. I know a lot of people who like...
Curiosity.
How are we going to deal with this? This thing is changing so much. But I think change, you have to accept change, because things are not going to stop changing because you didn't like it. So you might as well just get onto that bus and stick with it. I love technology because of that, because it changes. I love the fact that we're now in a space where technology has gone to that part of, okay, we can do this, we can have those use cases. Now we're looking at saying, okay, it's everywhere. It has to be meaningful for users. It shouldn't dominate the user. It should help the users do whatever they want. So we're at this really lovely point. I'm wondering what's going to come tomorrow. Maybe more kinds of technology.
And more complexities for the users to be solved.
Yeah, I think probably even embracing it further into the human system, which is what's happening now. I think that's really fascinating. What's happening with AI, what's happening with machines taking over decisions from users.
Some of those scenarios are scary.
Almost all of those scenarios are scary. It also depends on what we define ourselves as. Do we want to feel that we are in control? Are we okay with giving up that control? Which is why I think each of us struggles with it at a different level.
Good. So thanks, Vandana. I think it's been a very, very power-packed conversation. There are a lot of things I'm sure our listeners would like to think over and then probably get back with questions. We'll pass them on to you.
Great. I look forward to that. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. If you like the show and would like to share your experiences with the community or know someone else who might want to do that, please get in touch with us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com. That is podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.
Please rate the show on Podchaser, Stitcher, iTunes, or any other podcast client that you find us on. Please also share our episodes with your friends and others in your network. If you or anyone you know would like to be featured on our show, do write to us at this email address: podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.